Well, welcome. This session is titled Selflessness as a Transformative Virtue. And the question for our consideration with this session is how can we better connect with others to handle challenges and leave a lasting impact? My name is Nathan Hollis II. I am an assistant professor of education at Grand Canyon University. And in September, I will be approaching my 13th year at GCU. I have a background that spans teaching in the classroom, corporate training, curriculum development, and college administration. Currently, I teach several courses at GCU, but I often talk with the students in the ethics course about the significance of compassion and integrity, and most importantly, selflessness in the work that we do as educators. In this session, participants will identify how the fruit of the Spirit align to God's most important commandments. This session invites participants to reflect on the role of selflessness in both their professional practice and personal relationships. Participants will explore how acts of empathy, humility, and service can foster stronger relationships. And through some storytelling, scriptural references, and reflective activities, participants will learn or be reminded of practical strategies that model selflessness, enhances student engagement, and that build a more compassionate learning environment. In essence, in a world that often emphasizes individual achievement and competition, selflessness can be the transformative force. Well, if you know me, then you know very well who this person in the picture is. This is my father and I. I think I was about 6 years old at the time. And while many know me to be a mama's boy, I was often a daddy's shadow. And as a young child, I was very anxious. I was talkative, energetic, curious, all of the characteristics that made my father very uncomfortable. He nor my older two brothers were the same in their personality. They had a totally different temperament. However, over time, my father began to realize that I would only feel comfortable if he adjusted his parenting style to meet my needs. And he acquiesced. It was not popular in the 1970s for a father to necessarily give in to their child. It was very typical for the child to acclimate to the environment and culture of the family. However, without my father adjusting to my needs, I think I may very well have lacked the opportunity to develop skills in self-regulation or in developing situational awareness. I also would have not learned strategies for nurturing my own curiosity and for properly investing my energy into things that effectively occupied my time. As a young child, I knew my father was making exceptions for me. Actually, my older brothers also reminded me of this at every chance that they got. But I know that without my father deciding to evolve from a traditional provider and protector to more of a nurturer, I perhaps would not have developed selflessness in return. So, the fruit of the Spirit, we have from Galatians 5, verses 22 and 23, the fruit of the Spirit described as joy and peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And these characteristics reflect the nature of Christ in accordance with the Holy Spirit. We know that in today's world, these characteristics come with their own fair set of challenges, and they are sometimes easier to convey or demonstrate. They're easier said than done. We also know that from the Bible's many, many expressions of the significance of love, that love in Matthew 22, verses 37 through 39 is expressed as the greatest of all of the commandments. These fruit of the Spirit and this parable of the Good Samaritan are just two of many examples of the importance of us being selfless. In the Good Samaritan, if you are familiar with the parable, there's a Jewish traveler who was essentially left for dead and was ignored by two men, one being a Jewish priest and one being a Levite, before the Good Samaritan intervened on the man's behalf. Well, in the parable, the lawyer asks, "And who is my neighbor?" After Jesus shared the parable, uh, the man asked, Jesus asked, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And the lawyer replied, the one who had mercy on him. To which Jesus said, go and do likewise. So there's an important part to point out here that as a part of the parable, Jesus spoke about the importance of loving the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with your mind. But secondly, Jesus spoke about the importance of loving your neighbor as yourself, which is a very poignant way to talk about the significance of being neighborly, being selfless. We want to be treated well. We want to make sure that there's an opportunity for us to be heard and seen and nurtured. And we have to remember, according to Luke verse 37, to do the same for our neighbor. But finally, the importance and significance here is the command to go and do likewise. So it's not enough that we profess simply with our mouths the importance of loving our neighbor, but that we actually perform the duties consistently. Why was this parable of the Good Samaritan so profound? It was a question I remember asking my father growing up when he would tell me about this story and the importance of treating other people with kindness and showing compassion. Well, it's interesting because Jesus very intentionally had religious leaders who were designated to lead with goodness. And those very leaders were the ones who walked by this man in need, a priest and a Levite. However, he chose a Samaritan, an outsider, to be the hero. The Lord conveys the importance of not just saying we care, but actually showing concerns for others, even when we're uncomfortable. And that's a big part of this story. When something's unfamiliar to us, when we can't recognize all of what it is, we still have a responsibility to act in kindness and compassion. So, how comfortable are you with helping others who have a different set of values, perhaps? Maybe they have a different set of politics. Maybe they have a different lived experience than you. How comfortable are you with helping them when in need? How comfortable are you with helping others who have a different set of virtues? Maybe you're big on respect, and perhaps they're not as big on respect. How can we coexist in a world, not just with like-minded people, but with people who have different virtues and different values? So let me ask you this. Think about your ecosystem. It could be members of your family, it could be your friends, communities, your colleague, etc. What would it take for you to give selflessly to someone in need? We have to be aware of only helping people who are in need when we're comfortable, right? And so sometimes what that looks like is only donating our old clothes, or maybe we're feeding the unhoused. While that's really important, what if the need is not food or water or clothing, but love? Could you love someone who is unhoused and pray upon them? Could you wish them and pray for joy and their peace? How can we demonstrate the fruits of the Spirit rather than those tangible things with people? Well, let's talk about the classroom here. One of the things that is really important to make sure that we're demonstrating selflessness is to first build rapport. And when we're in the classroom, whether it is pre-kindergarten or college and every grade in between, it is important to be consistent in evaluating students' needs and interests so that we can help build rapport. If you're familiar with the name Dr. Rita Pearson, she's a famed educator, and she stated that children don't learn from people they don't like. And to a large degree, this may be true. However, I believe we can all agree that rapport precedes rigor, respect, and results. And also, without connection, instruction will often fall flat. So it's important that we have that connection with our students to help build the opportunity for learning. Just three very broad ideas for building rapport with students and family can first start with actively listening, making sure that we create very poignant opportunities, intentional opportunities, so that our students, their families can be heard. And maybe even initiating those opportunities through surveys and conferencing and other conversations. These designated times and these real-time occasions can be valuable in learning who our students are and also exchanging information with them. So maybe they learn a little bit about who we are. Secondly, engagement strategies. Many students nowadays really need to be challenged in thinking differently. They have all sorts of methods for gaining information, and they have different channels for obtaining information that may fall in alignment with what they already believe. And there may be very few of those channels that challenge them to think differently or to think broader or more deeply. And so creating engagement strategies where perhaps that's done is valuable. One of the things that I always like to do with my students is I always like to ask them questions and get them to talk. And then as they make a statement, I'll ask them more questions about what they just said. I may ask them, hey, can you explain why you feel the way that you feel? Do you know the source of this thought process? Where did it originate? How would you feel if I gave a different perspective for you to consider? But as a part of these questions, I want to then have them take stake and ownership in engaging in conversation and learning. Lastly, it's important as a part of building rapport with our students and families that we make sure they can see themselves in the majority of what they experience. Culturally relevant learning experiences are just that. They're equitable and inclusive opportunities, way bigger than race and ethnicity, for students to see themselves in the conversation. Am I being respected as a learner? Are my thoughts and opinions being validated as a part of this conversation? Those can be some of the ways that students experience cultural relevance in the classroom. Also, having opportunities to have them have say in the learning process itself, which leads to a couple of quick resources I want to share. First, we have the Canyon Center for Character Education. You may have heard of our institution here at the College of Education at GCU. If not, you can use the QR code to access the Canyon Center for Character Ed. They have a ton of resources that I think you will find very valuable, one of which I wanted to use for the purpose of this conversation. Compassion speaking cards. Now, they could be used for a variety of ways. However, what I would like to have you consider is cutting out these cards and using them in a deck, and perhaps creating additional compassion speaking cards that in a small circle or as a part of a classroom meeting or discussion, you simply ask these questions to create dialogue. So for example, asking your first graders or your middle schoolers or your high school or college students, what's one way you can practice kindness today? That's just an example of setting the tone with students so that they can start to practice the work, but it can also be an opportunity for them to maybe learn if they've never practiced kindness in any particular way, right? Sometimes our students, no matter their age, they have to have modeled opportunities to learn. And so perhaps a conversation can be the start of that modeled opportunity. But these are great speaking cards as an engagement activity. There are other opportunities for students to engage in compassion as well as other virtues through the Canyon Center for Character Ed. We have a few other student activities to highlight here. One, service learning projects. If you are not familiar with service learning projects, please do some research to become familiar. They are a wonderful opportunity for students to learn how to be selfless, taking care of other people, prioritizing the needs and interests of their community, perhaps above their own. And as educators, we can connect that kind of community service aspect with an academic standard or standards. It is also important to point out with service learning projects that students are the ones who lead in the service learning. It is important that they create the opportunities to research and to advertise and to contact, and the teacher in turn guides the process. The second one I would like to highlight is Kindness Week. When I was a first grade teacher, this was something I did towards the beginning of each school year to get students ready to learn, one, my expectations for their behavior, but also to give an opportunity for them to practice being kind to one another. We would do things like write notes to each other and other people in the school or members of their family. We would sit at the carpet and discuss and brainstorm ideas for demonstrating kindness. So some students would talk about picking up litter on campus. Others would talk about bringing a treat for a friend or their favorite teacher. But whatever the activities were, it gave intentional time for students to perform acts of kindness for others. Third, kindness journals. This idea can also be called gratitude journals, but it's an opportunity for students to reflect on what they performed, what they think, or what they observed in others related to kindness. And they may keep this kindness journal private between student and teacher so that dialogue happens only between the two. Or this may be something made more public where students stand before the class to share their journal entry, or they may do something outside of the class with other members of their community to share their reflection of selflessness. Last but not least, there are a variety of in-class activities that you can demonstrate, from reading certain books and watching certain videos to participating in role play exercises where students really have a chance to learn, while the stake may be lower, what does selflessness look like? And then they can have an opportunity to expand that practice outside of the classroom. This video should be able to have a hyperlink so that you can look at the watching videos link to see some of the examples firsthand. The Center for Character Education, and you'll see their email address here, charactereducation@gcu.edu, has a ton of resources available to all of our partners and community members. You can go to the website. That's the first QR code made available to you. There is a second QR code that includes a host of resources for in the classroom as well as for professional development. And then last but not least, there are also some social media profiles for you to access, one via LinkedIn and then two via Instagram. Again, these are great resources to identify the best ways that you can go about partnering with the Canyon Center for Character Education with implementing the virtues, not only in your classroom, but also in your community. Thank you for your time today. I hope that this was just the start of you reflecting on ways in which you can be more selfless. But as we go back to our initial question, I want to make sure that we have intentional time for you to think about selflessness as a transformative virtue. How can we better connect with others to handle challenges and leave a lasting impact? Thank you. Have a good one.